Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible comes together to fulfill the story of God. I'm Fletcher.
I'm Abby.
And I'm Jay.
And today's story is about Gideon.
Gideon. Giddy up. Giddy up, Gideon.
I'm trying to think of if there was a VeggieTales Gideon.
Song. There was a VeggieTales Gideon.
What was his name? Gid?
I think it was Gideon.
Just Gideon.
There's no
I'll look it up.
because it's like Dave and the giant pickle.
Right.
Josh and the wall.
I'll look it up.
Jonah was just Jonah,
Yeah,
I
that's
think.
true.
Yeah. Gideon.
There was an Adventures in Odyssey about Gideon, I know that, and it was like a news reporter, and he's like, look, and now they have trumpets and water pitchers, and they're breaking them on the floor.
The
It's very funny.
VeggieTales Gideon was Gideon Tuba Warrior.
There you go. And
That's
that
why-
just tees up everything for us because our
Exactly.
question is, what instrument would you play to scare away the Midianites? If you had to play an instrument, what would you play to scare away?
Gideon the Tuba Warrior. Jay, what's your answer?
Well,
Are you going to be a Tuba Warrior
Jay
too?
the Tuba Warrior.
we were talking about that, and we were talking about the one. What's the name of the one that wraps around your body? The Susaphone, the marching band tuba. Yeah, maybe it would be. And I have a bit of experience because in high school, my band instrument was the baritone horn, and so we were getting ready to play for this like summer festival, strawberry festival thing or whatever, and we were playing the theme song to The Simpsons, which is pretty fun to play in high school band, right? And then our tuba player got expelled, or no, he got suspended. He didn't get expelled, but he got suspended.
And you had to pick up the
I
shambles?
had to pick up, like with a week to go, I had to learn how to play the tuba. But it's the same, it's all the same notes, just dropped one octave.
Now, I played the trumpet, and it's brass, and it's similar.
Right.
But I found the trumpet, you have to keep all your air in, whereas the tuba,
you
I
just
played
let
it
it
once,
out.
and you
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
use all your air. So I couldn't
Yeah.
do it. I did it for 3 seconds, and I ran out of breath. trying to blow into that huge tuba.
Yeah.
So Tuba Warrior.
So I'd be Jay the Tuba Warrior,
There
or
you
the
go.
Susaphone Warrior.
there you go,
Right.
wrapping
Because I
around your
want
body.
to be marching while I was doing it.
I mean, at least a marching band instrument. That makes sense going into battle.
Right, there you go.
There you go. What
And
about
you
you,
have both
Fletcher?
hands free. You got two
No,
swords
you gotta
and a
play.
tuba.
You gotta do the fingering.
But you got one hand free at least.
Yeah, I'm doing the valve.
There you go.
The valve
actions
action with his fingers.
With my fingers. Yeah.
What about you,
Abby.
Fletcher?
Oh, my answer. See, I was gonna say the trumpet, but I already mentioned that. So I'm thinking the double. Who plays that in rock bands? You know the double massive guitars that have 2 fretboards. They're huge. You play 12 strings at a time, and then a big amplifier. Nowhere to plug it in. I'm assuming if I'm fighting Midianites,
That's
but
fair, yeah.
You'd have an amp on your back.
yeah, as a backpack. Yeah.
When you mention
Amplifier.
that, the first thing that comes to mind is the person who sits and has a drumstick taped to their hat.
Yeah.
And they got a accordion between their legs.
A harmonica,
and they're
something
playing
attached to their
guitar,
leg,
and
yeah.
they're doing the full
everything.
band thing, and yeah.
I'm playing it with my tongue, the guitar.
There's a YouTube or Instagram guy who plays the ukulele while riding a unicycle.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it's pretty.
I don't think that would be
cycle.
all that intimidating, though, to be honest with
I would
you.
be just impressed. I'd be clapping along. Holy cow.
I would just be afraid to be in any social setting with that person.
Yeah, fair enough.
What else can they do?
They're embarrassed.
Honestly.
Yeah.
I knew somebody who rode a unicycle, and he was a musician, but I don't think he played the unicycle and did musician
There you
stuff.
go.
That's a rare skill. Well,
That's-
not many
He
people can
probably
do it.
could. He had ADHD, so he probably could. But yeah.
All right, Abby, what about you?
I think I would pick, because you don't actually have to fight the Midianites. God does the scaring away. I think I would get a bunch of organs, like the big
Like the
pianos.
guts?
No,
Oh,
like
the
the
big
big
pianos. Got
and
it.
surround them, and then just start playing Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. I think that's the one that goes ba 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 ba.
Okay.
But that would be pretty scary to hear a bunch of organ pianos all around the valley. They're pretty terrifying.
And the
so.
big church ones that
Yeah,
are 30
they're
foot
really
pipes.
massive
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah.
If you saw that, you would look like giants, and it would be really loud.
Right.
So
You know, the other one that comes to mind that would be good is the trombone, just because
somebody gets a little too
yeah, they get a little too close. You just poke them in the nose.
Josh
with
plays trombone. He has one.
as you punch them.
Wow. And of course, with the brass instruments, you just empty the spit valves,
Oh,
and that
right
just
on
grosses
them.
everyone
True.
out too. And
That's true.
It's gross.
oh,
I once
man.
saw this video of trumpet players playing tic-tac-toe on the band floor with their saliva. I was like, that's pretty gross.
That's amazing.
I was a
and
spitty
gross all at
trumpet
once.
player. I have to
I
admit,
believe that.
there was
yeah.
so much spit in my spit valve. That's
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
Went all over the floor.
I don't even remember now. Like where did we empty those?
On the floor.
Just onto
You
the
just-
floor.
Yeah, on the floor.
We usually put like a little napkin down to
I
catch it,
didn't.
but
Man.
it was carpeted, so our
right.
band
Oh,
room was
that's even
carpeted. Yeah, so
worse.
we had to use it.
Oh.
Otherwise, it would just get really gross.
Oh, wow. Okay, let us know in the
Where you emptied your spit valves. No.
let us know what instrument you would play to scare away the Midianites if it fell on you to be in battle in such a way. Of course, as always, we do encourage you to read the stories for yourselves. That way you get a whole picture of what is going on. And today's story takes place in the book of Judges. So we're
Again.
not leaving the book of Judges. Last week we saw Deborah.
Is this number 3? I think so.
right?
Number 3 in
Yeah.
the Book of Judges.
And so, it was Deborah last week, the only female judge / prophet in the book. And this week, we're continuing to move through Judges, and today's character, as we've mentioned, is Gideon. So since Deborah, there have been 40 years of peace. But as we've already talked about in the book of Judges, the story, we see Israel just messing up and doing evil in the sight of the Lord, often because they've turned to foreign gods and idols. And so God then turns them over to the Midianites, who oppress them for 7 years. And as we read through this, the Midianites, they're so cruel that they actually force Israel to hide in caves and in the mountains. And whenever Israel would plant crops, the Midianites would come and they would steal all their food. That's just kind of like, that's mean. They would steal their food, their livestock, and they would camp there until they had destroyed all the crops and the land. And so Israel is left kind of in starvation mode, and they find themselves crying out to God to save them.
Once again. Yes, it's happened. This is like the 4th time, 5th time in the Book of Judges, if
Yeah.
you go read it. Over and over again, it happens. Like kind of last week, it's in a very similar timeline, only around 40 years later after the story of Deborah. So again, it's around 1200 to 1150 BC. And of course, Israel has no formal leadership. They're in the time of the judges, and they're just kind of these appointed people, appointed by God. And they are, so the Midianites, and they're starving, they're stealing all their food. And you actually might recognize the name Midianite, and it's the land of Midian.
Right.
And if we go back to our episode a few weeks ago on Moses, he got married to a Midianite, and his father-in-law, who we talked about, I don't know, season 1 or 2,
Right.
Jethro, was a Midianite. And so we go back even further, and Abraham actually had this other wife, and he had 6 sons with them, one of them being Midian.
Right.
And so these Midianite people used to be followers of God because of their father Abraham, and friends with Israel in the form of Moses' family. Mm-hmm. And so we see the breakdown of that relationship. They used to be following God, they used to be helping Israel, and they would work together. And now things have gone a little sour. They started fighting each other, and God has basically told them somewhere in the book of Numbers that you can go and attack Midian. And now Midian is in charge of them. They're cruelly ruling over them, and that's where we find ourselves today.
Yes, so Midian, as we talked about in previous episodes, is probably in Saudi Arabia, modern day. And this story is a battle that takes place throughout Israel. So Gideon first hears from God at Oprah, south of the Sea of Galilee.
Winfrey? No.
South of the Sea of Galilee and west of the Jordan River. And then they go to the valley of Jezreel, and there's a battle at Beth Barah, which is north of the Dead Sea. And then the final battle takes place at Karkor, which is in modern-day Jordan. Mm-hmm. So again, all throughout Israel and in Jordan.
They just chase him around. Yeah.
Basically.
So it starts. The people have called out to God once again to save them. And God actually this time sends a prophet. And he basically says, listen, I'm the God who brought you out of Egypt. I'm the God who did all this for you and saved your people in your time of need. I delivered you from slavery. And then I told you, don't serve any other gods but me. And what did you do? You went and worshipped other gods and served idols instead of me.
Yep.
And so that's what this prophet has gone and tell the people. And at the same time, an angel starts to appear under this tree in Oprah, wherever Abby said there. And this is where Gideon lived. And Gideon was threshing wheat, it says, inside a wine press. So he was kind of sneaking around trying to make bread, essentially make flour, get the wheat, so the Midianites wouldn't steal it. And he's hiding away. And this angel appears to him and says, come warrior Gideon, I have called you. You're gonna come deliver Israel.
Which is immediately a little bit humorous because he's a coward. He's already hiding he's doing a cowardly thing in hiding out and trying to avoid conflict at all costs. And the angel's like, mighty warrior,
I'm with you. Yeah, exactly. So Gideon's like, okay, well, if you're really with us, why is all this happening? Why is Midian oppressing us? Why are we starving? And what happened to God doing all these miracles? I hear these stories from our ancestors and God delivering our people. Where is he now? What's going on? Has God abandoned us? And so God tells Gideon that you are going to rescue Israel from the Midianites, and I am sending you to do that. And Gideon's like, how am I going to do that? I'm, the lowest member in my family. I'm just a kid. And, my tribe, my family is the weakest in all of my tribe.
Yeah.
So he's from this tribe called Manasseh, and they're not a great, huge, powerful tribe. And then his clan, his family inside.
Half tribe, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So they're a small tribe already. And then his family inside of that is a small family and a weak family.
Yep.
And Gideon he's the lowest member of the family. So he's asking, how can he do this? And God says, I will be with you, is his answer, right? So Gideon says, okay, I need a sign. I need proof that this is really God speaking to me. So Gideon says, okay, well, I'm going to perform a sacrifice. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. So Gideon goes, he kills a goat, and he bakes bread, and he comes back, and the angel says, put it here on this rock. And so Gideon does that, and then he pours broth or water, like soup, onto the meat and the bread. And then the angel takes his staff and touches it with it, and it just bursts into flames and burns up completely.
Barbecue.
And the angel disappears. Barbecue, but it's gone.
It's gone.
Too bad. It's like Jay cooking. No, I'm just joking. And the angel disappears at the same time. And Gideon's like, I'm going to die. I've seen God's face. Like, I'm screwed. I'm done. I'm going to die. I'm doomed. And he hears the voice from God again. You're not going to die. And then he gives him this command. He says, go take a bull from your father's flock, and you're going to go burn down the altar to Baal and to Asherah. And now Baal and Asherah were these two pagan gods that they kind of adopted from the Canaanites that they took over. And that was kind of the main reason God was mad at them in the first place. They turned away from him, and now they're worshiping Baal and Asherah poles.
Right.
And so he says, go burn down these idols, and then set up an altar and perform a sacrifice to the Lord on top of them.
Which is also kind of neat because the name Gideon, the translation is hewer, but what that actually means is hacker. And so like he actually goes and he hacks down
those poles.
The poles. Yeah.
Cool.
Which is kind of neat.
Gideon
and then
the hewer.
Maybe a little more hacking a little later.
We'll see. So yeah, he burns down the idols and the altar to those pagan gods. And in the morning, the people aren't happy. They're like, who burnt down our idols? Who burnt down our temple or our altars? We're going to kill them.
Yep.
And so they ask around the town. They found out that Gideon did it. So Gideon's hiding away, and his father comes out and says, look, who are you to accuse somebody in the name of Baal? Let Baal accuse them for himself.
Right.
Let Baal do the judging. And if he's really the God, he'll condemn them. And so Gideon kind of gets away with it because they're going to let Baal do the punishing.
Figure it out,
And his nickname now is Judged by Baal.
Right.
And of course he goes on living. So Gideon has now done what God has commanded the first. Now, a little bit later, the armies of the Amalekites and the Midianites have kind of banded together, and they've started to camp on Israel's territory in the valley of the Jezreel. And it says that God's spirit came upon Gideon, and he starts calling the men of Israel and the men of his clan and a couple other tribes. I think it was Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. And he starts summoning them to come fight the Amalekites and the Midianites. And Gideon, once again, he goes, God, don't be mad at me, but if you're really going to use me, I'm gonna do this test.
Right.
And so he puts out this wool fleece out and says, okay, in the morning, if it's covered in dew but nothing else is, then I'll trust you and I'll believe that you are God and I'll fight for you. And so he does it, he puts it out, and the next morning comes around and he wrings out the fleece, and it's just coming, pouring out with water. And he's like, okay, God, don't be mad at me, but I'm going to do it again. I want to test you again. I'm going to do it, but this time the fleece has to be dry and everything else has to be covered in dew. And so he puts it out, and the next morning comes out, everything's wet with dew, and he goes to the fleece and it's completely dry. And so he's out of options. He has tested God. He knows that it's his will. And he's like, okay. So that morning he summons up his army and he brings them out into the mountain right above where the Midianites were camping out, and he sees them. And God goes, listen, you have too big of an army. If you attack them now and you win, it'll be because you think it's your own strength. You're winning the war by yourself. And so we gotta shed those numbers down. So he tells Gideon to go and tell anybody who's scared or timid, if they don't want to fight, they don't have to fight. They can leave.
This is your out.
This is your out. Easy out. And so they end up losing 2/3 of their army. I think there was like 30,000, and they're left with 10,000 men. And they've just chopped their numbers into 2/3, and they're left with 10,000 men. And so Gideon goes to God, all right, what are we going to do? And God says, you know what, your army's still a little bit too big.
Yeah.
Again, you're going to try to claim your victory for yourself if you win this battle. So go send people to the creek and have them drink water out of it. And he says, okay, everybody who has drank water and cupped it in their hands and then drank it, take them to one side. And everybody else who's just stuck their face in and drank water like that, put them to the other side. And I have to admit, I would drink water. I would just stick my face in. If I'm like thirsty, I'm going to a river. I don't think I'd take the time to use my hands.
Yeah, I was trying to think about that. Maybe the difficulty to bend down and get my face into the stream
that
would cause me to pick it up with my hand, but I'd probably do the same.
I've always actually felt a little like self-conscious about that. I'm like, oh, God wouldn't pick me. I'm like, is that the wrong way to drink water? But anyway, so God then chooses the people who picked up the water all nicely and lapped it
I'm
out of their
just
hands.
picturing like this whole religious movement of like, this is the
right way to drink water. Exactly.
When your baby first comes out, if they drink water with their face first, then
you know
they're not godly.
Mm-hmm. but if they cup their hands,
they are godly. I don't trust my own instincts of that's the right way to drink water. But God chooses those people who cup their hands and drank out of their hands, and that was only 300 men.
Yeah,
300.
Doesn't seem like enough to fight a battle with God.
No. And there was 10,000, so everybody thinks like me, apparently. And 300 special fellas got chosen to go with Gideon.
Wow.
And so now they're going to go fight this big battle. And so they move a little bit closer, and they're camped out on the mountainside right beside the valley. And they go out and see the army. And it says their numbers are like the sand on the shore. They have camels, too numerous to count. And so God goes to tell Gideon again. He goes, listen, if you're scared, I'm going to go show you something. And so he leads Gideon and one of his servants down to the camp, and they sneak in, and they hear one of the soldiers saying, oh, I had this dream last night. Yeah. And in that dream, a loaf of bread rolled down out of the mountains and crushed the tents flat. And then the other soldier goes, well, this can only mean one thing. Gideon's army is coming. Gideon the Israelite is going to come and destroy us. Yeah. And so that kind of reminds me, if you remember back to one of our episodes, we talked about Rahab and the spies when Israel was taking Jericho.
Yep.
Rahab says, the people know of the power of God. The people know that you are going to come and destroy them. So there's terror in them, and we see the exact same thing going on with the Midianite army.
Defeated in their own eyes.
They know that they're coming to be destroyed, and they're scared. Yeah. And so God has already started working in the army to give Israel victory. Yep. So Gideon's all obviously riled up by this. He's excited, and he praises God, and he goes and gets his men, and he separates them into 3 groups, so 100 each, 300 men. Right. And he gives each of them, this is where our question comes in, a trumpet, an instrument, and he gives everybody a clay pot with a torch inside. Uh-huh. And he says, this is the plan. We're going to go surround the camp as much as we can, and whenever I blow the trumpet, everybody's going to blow the trumpet, and everybody's going to throw down their pots and hold out their torches. And so they go out, And as soon as it's like in the middle of the night, they blow their trumpets. Everybody sounds their trumpets, and then they smash the clay pots on the ground and hold up their torches. And it says the Midianite camp falls into a panic, and they start fighting amongst themselves.
Yeah.
So there's mass confusion. Everybody starts killing each other. They're freaking out. And just because these Israelites have these trumpets and have these torches, they start panicking.
These random noises and fires starting all over the place.
And there's mass confusion, and it says that God sows discord in their camp. So they start fighting each other. And then everybody who didn't die, it says, starts running and in confusion and starts retreating south down the Jordan River. And that's where we're going to stop today. If you want to keep reading in Judges to see what happens with Gideon, that's in Judges chapter 8. It's very cool, some cool battles.
It's a good story.
But we can't. We're running out of time.
He gets a little more. He gets a bigger chunk of Judges than.
Yeah, he gets 3 whole chapters.
Yeah.
Even Deborah, I think, only had 2. But yeah, Gideon, he defeats the Midianites and the Amalekites without even lifting a sword. He just had a trumpet.
That's it.
And 300 men against thousands.
So what makes him an unlikely fella?
Ooh, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that he brings up as the reason that it doesn't make sense is he's of very little significance in his own family, which is of little significance in his tribe, which is of little significance in all of Israel. And so that would make it seem very unlikely from his point of view that he would be used by God.
And I'm sure from all the other tribes and armies of Israel's point of view as well.
Yeah.
You know, what's going on? God using this little kid for? What's God using this small man for?
Yeah, because they expect God to use the best and the greatest.
And I think even like you mentioned before, a coward
Right.
hiding from the Midianites, trying to keep his food and not starve to death.
That's right.
Hiding in a wine press, which is just a hole in the ground that they trampled grapes on.
Yeah, he's just trying to survive.
Yeah.
And God shows up and is like, guess what? I'm going to use you. So that would be very unlikely.
I think another aspect of that is that how much God cuts down the army is unlikely. It's like, okay, we want to muster as much strength as we can to try to win this battle. And God goes, no. I'm the strength.
Yeah.
You just got to show up. And so he uses these unlikely amount of 300 men to do the work of an entire army.
Yeah.
And
It'd be
succeeds.
interesting. It'd be interesting if, because it would be even more unlikely, I guess, if God was like, find out who's afraid and who's not, and keep the ones that are afraid, right? Because that would have been even more.
I think you'd get in trouble with the troops. No, I want to fight. No, go home.
Yeah, you go home. Yeah,
and the lapping water.
Yeah,
using those weirdos who use their hands. No.
That's right. And so I think, and this is maybe a theme that we see throughout this whole season, when we talk about what is unlikely, a lot of what we think makes sense doesn't make sense in God's economy and in his way of doing things. We think that, we need to be these great accomplished people in order to be used by God, and God consistently says, no, that's not what I'm looking for. The phrase, I don't know if I've used it on this podcast or not before, and it's a phrase that's widely used in Christian circles, that God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And so if you are called by God, he will place the qualifications on you and he'll use you. And it's him. And the First Thessalonians passage that talks about faithful is he who calls, and he will do it. When the Lord places something in our path and calls us to something, we need to trust that he is going to do the work in and through us. And Gideon is a great example of that. Even though he's a coward and he doesn't trust God, he tests God more than once in ways that he really shouldn't have if he was gonna, like, those are all signs of distrust and a lack of faith, really.
Well, you said something about we don't know the ways of God, and that kind of just reminded me of, if you think of the story of Jesus talking to Peter, who am I? And you're the Son of God, you're the Christ. And he says, you can't go. Peter says, you can't go do all these things. You can't go and die. And Jesus says, you don't know the ways of God. You don't know God.
Yeah.
And so we don't know the ways of God, and they don't make sense to us. But as we can see, especially through this story, and then, the Jesus story, which we will tell, I think, a little bit later in the season, he knows the best way, and his ways work. And so we have to put our trust in him to get it done.
Yeah.
I had a question about the testing. Is there any aspect of testing that can be positive as opposed to just a lack of trust?
Yeah, I think it's a fine line, right? That we want to be careful not to say that, like, we want to be sure that what we're stepping into is of God, and so I wouldn't want to say, and I guess the word testing is where it gets difficult. I wonder if there's just a better word for us to use in
Verify.
discerning God's will and discerning what He may or may not be calling and leading us into, because I think it's important for us to be discerning in that and to know kind of, I don't know if we can say for sure, but to have some things set in place to be able to, and there are some, we have tools for that as believers. I'm making a decision right now. How do I know if it's the right decision? Well, does the Bible speak against it? Because if the Bible speaks against it, then we're probably not supposed to be doing that. What have I sensed in prayer? How have I felt the Holy Spirit active in this decision that I'm making? Do I have a peace about it? And that's one that we have to be careful about, because it has to coincide. If I have a peace about it, again, it has to line up with, does the Bible speak against it, or is there permission in that? And I think we've also been given a wonderful resource in other believers, and we bring things to other believers for discernment as well. And we talk to people like prayer partners in our lives, and accountability partners, and just people, mentors, spouses, family, whatever, other believers, other people who are doing the same thing, praying about it, reading the scriptures. And so we have scriptures, prayer in the presence of the Holy Spirit, and other believers that help us to come to those places of discernment as we make decisions. But just saying, I wonder if if it snows tonight, then I'm gonna marry that person, right? Like, we live in central Ontario. It snows a lot. It wasn't supposed to snow today, and there was snowflakes flying all over the place. So,
and I think Gideon almost seems like, okay, how can I almost get out of this? I'm gonna test God. I'm gonna put him to the test. I think there was 3 different times that he tried to test God to figure out. And if we're having a heart to try to discern what God has for us, that's a good form of discernment or testing. Whereas if we're just trying to tempt fate and use randomness in the weather or in something else, then it kind of falls apart. And
now, that said, if God's calling you to something and you make up some ridiculous test, good luck, because He's probably going to meet it. And
if He does, you better stay true to what you tested Him on. Because it's even stricter of a call if He's changing something and doing something like that just to get you to listen. So be careful if you test Him, because if He answers,
that's it.
So how does this story lead to the fulfilling of the rest of the story of God throughout the Bible?
Absolutely. So I think, as we continue to unfold the story of Judges, how much the people need God and how easily they turn away from Him when He's not a part of their lives, when they start turning to other gods and other idols. And so eventually, of course, this story leads to the people receiving a king, and then God promises to give an even bigger king. And so it's just a beautiful unfolding of the necessity of God in our lives, and we can definitely apply that to ourselves today in needing God, and how quickly things can fall apart without Him.
I think it also it sheds light on a question that a lot of people ask, which is, if God is real, why do bad things happen?
Why is God letting this happen?
Why is God letting this happen? Where are the miracles that we've heard about, or all the good things? And we see in this that while Gideon is asking that very question, God is at work behind the scenes, and God is doing the things that he does in order to bring about his will. And we see that in the Midianites. They're having dreams about being defeated. They're in so many ways they're already defeated in their own eyes, and that's the work of the Lord. And so I think that this story helps us to answer that question, which it's often asked from a very self-serving place, right? If God is real, why is all this bad stuff happening? Which makes you the center of the universe. And this reminds us that we as individuals are a part of God's bigger story, and we don't see all of the moving parts, but in it we can trust him and his goodness. So yeah, I
think adding along the same lines of that is, what if you look at what he answers? Why is all this happening? Why have we been turned over to the Midianites? And God's answer is, I've called you to go help.
Yeah,
I've called you to go save Israel.
Yeah,
and in the same way, we are meant to go out and love people and love God and make disciples. So in a way, God's saying, I'm working behind the scenes and I'm taking care of it in my way, and you need to be helping and doing your part as well. I think is exactly what God's answer is to Gideon, right? Is not to just sit idly by while he lets this happen, but go out and fight God's mission, not just for yourself and threshing wheat in a cave somewhere.
Yeah, totally. There, I forget the song. There's a song where there's a guy.
Abby, if it's a song, we got to ask Abby.
Yeah,
she's
and he's the guy singing it is like complaining to God about all the stuff and he says, what are you gonna do about it? And he's like, well, I made you, and I've made you to step into it. And Abby's not.
We got to Shazam whatever you're saying. I don't think it'll work though. God made you to do it.
I thought I had it in my notes actually, but I can't find it in there.
Oh well.
But yeah, it is like, yeah, we have been given a role to play sometimes in what our complaints are, right? Like we have a complaint that there's certain things happening in the world that we don't agree with, and we're saying, God, what are you doing about it? And he's saying, I'm actually making it heavy on your heart.
Yeah.
And so there's a place for you to step into
absolutely
what that is. Do Something is the name of the song.
Look it up, people. Do something.
Do something. I forget who sings it, but here's some of the lyrics. It says, I woke up this morning, saw a world full of trouble, and thought, how do we ever get so far down? And it's never gonna turn around. So I turned my eyes to heaven and thought, God, why don't you do something? Well, I just couldn't bear the thought of people living in poverty, children sold into slavery. The thought disgusted me. So I shook my fist at heaven and said, God, why don't you do something? He said, I did. I created you.
There you go. All right. Well, you heard it. Do something.
Do something.
Do something.
All right. Have a great week. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.
Bye for now.